Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Alice Tang, in for Tiffany Meyer. Our top story. Officials from the US and Russia met in the Middle East for talks on the war in Ukraine. As for one of Moscow's closest friends, could the war's end drive a wedge between Russia and China?
He wants to do this largely as a means of prying Russia away from the People's Republic of China. That's critical.
Hundreds of billions of dollars are fleeing China for investments into the country plunging into a record low, and domestic firms are sending money abroad. And first-hand details on the worsening health concerns inside China. Eyewitnesses report overloaded hospitals and funeral homes, pointing to a far more severe situation than Chinese authorities and media have left on. Could cover-up be in the works?
Hospitals everywhere are full, with many patients waiting for beds. Now, with so many people dying, the crematoriums are very busy.
Senior officials from the US and Russia met in the Middle East on Tuesday. They're holding talks in Saudi Arabia aimed at improving ties and negotiating an end to the war in Ukraine. And something to note, China is not invited. Both President Trump's predecessor, Joe Biden, and Ukraine view China as a key player that could influence Russia to end the war. Both also urged China to help resolve the conflict. Despite that, China continued its economic support for Russia, which has sustained the war. President Trump has taken a different approach by engaging directly with Russia. How do experts view the approach? Let's take a look.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov led their respective teams that met at the Diriyah Palace in Saudi Arabia. The meeting marks another pivotal step by the Trump administration in shifting U.S. policy away from isolating Russia. It is also meant to pave the way for a meeting between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Trump earlier this month said he and Putin had agreed to begin negotiations on ending the war.
This is a war that would have never happened if I were president.
Ukrainian officials aren't taking part in the meeting. Close Putin advisor Kirill Dmitriev said Monday that U.S.-Russia relations are very important for the world and that the two countries can find solutions.
And I think President Trump is a great problem solver, and also his team is a team of great problem solvers.
Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said last week that the U.S. prioritizes deterring war with China in the Pacific, referring to the war in Ukraine. He added that the U.S. acknowledges that resources are limited and must make tough choices to make sure deterrence does not fail. At the same time, how do strategists on Beijing's side against the U.S. read Washington's moves? Jing Tanrong, Associate Dean of the School of International Studies at a renowned university in Beijing, said Trump is preparing for a, quote, decisive battle with China. Hu Xijing, former editor-in-chief of newspaper Global Times, a mouthpiece for the Chinese regime, commented on President Trump's recent phone call with Russian President Putin, saying that Trump wanted Russia to return to the G7, side with the West, and confront China. To learn more about the topic, we spoke with Gregory Copley, president of the International Strategic Studies Association.
Gregory, thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you again. Now, with Rubio meeting Saudi Arabia's crown prince on Gaza's future, this also tees up a meeting there between Trump and Putin in terms of the Russia-Ukraine war. What do you see as the larger foreign policy objectives Trump has in negotiating peace here?
Well, basically, President Trump wants not only to end the Russia-Ukraine war, he also wants to tone down, if you like, Russia's differences with the West and particularly with the European states. He wants to do this largely as a means of prying Russia away from the People's Republic of China. That's critical. Just as Nixon was trying to pry China away from the Soviet Union in 1972, today, because of the post-Cold War governments of Clinton and Obama and Biden, what we've seen is that Russia was forced back into the arms of Beijing. So we've got to pry those apart, the PRC and Russia, so that you can get some degree of U.S. mutuality in dealing with both the Russians and with the communist Chinese. So that's going to be one of the things. What President Trump will do and use his unique ability as the major power in the world is to get President Putin to the negotiating table. We saw that the Europeans and President Zelensky of Ukraine have spent several occasions, including the recent Munich Security Conference, trying to, if you like, pre-negotiate a peace deal with Russia, but without having any contact with Russia or without knowing what Russia would be prepared to do to end this war.
I want to go back to your earlier point about China, because given the no limits friendship between China and Russia, how could the end of the Russia-Ukraine war impact that relationship between China and Russia? Will it pull Russia back towards the West and away from Beijing, or where do you see that going?
Well, the no limits arrangement between Beijing and Moscow was never no limits in the sense of it. They were always mistrustful of each other. Moscow and Beijing have been distrustful of each other for more than a century, and even particularly during the USSR period until 1990, they were always distrustful. And even Xi Jinping had said that he wanted to take back the Russian Far East, including Vladivostok and the like, which is absolutely not up for discussion as far as Moscow is concerned. The reality is that Moscow is the senior partner in that relationship right now. The People's Republic of China is more or less bankrupt, so it can't prosecute a war or demand too much from Moscow. So essentially, what we're going to see is Moscow, as you say, moving back toward the West, and that'll take various forms, and it'll be incremental, but we'll start to see a more balanced Eurasian continent. We'll start to see the People's Republic of China's isolation become more and more evident as a result of that, and that will be overall beneficial to both US global position and, for that matter, for NATO's position as well, because the big threat to NATO right now is not really Russia. It's the thought of subordination to the People's Republic of China.
Very fascinating. Gregory Copley, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now we pivot to the Taiwan Strait, the narrow body of water separating China and Taiwan. As tensions ramp up in the region, the U.S. is ramping up its naval presence in the strait. Just last week, the U.S. sent the Bowditch Marine Survey ship sailing through the body of water. It wasn't just a quick sail-through to flex American muscle, but a 3-day stay. This ship carries equipment that maps the ocean floor and collects data to help improve tech for underwater warfare and spotting enemy ships. Ma Junwei, an assistant professor at the University of Tanjiang in Taiwan, said the U.S. is implementing a long-term battle plan and that the U.S. ship collected data for possible military actions in the future. Something to note, the U.S. military is preparing for a possible confrontation with Beijing in the region. The Chinese regime has vowed to be ready to invade Taiwan by 2027. Investments into China is falling off a cliff. Foreign direct investment into the country dropped by $168 billion last year, hitting its lowest point in the past 3 decades. That number was released by the Chinese state agency overseeing the country's foreign exchange market. Meanwhile, Chinese firms have been moving their own money overseas, with Chinese investors sending over $170 billion abroad. A recent survey showed almost half of Japanese firms in China said they would cut back on investing in the country, a notable shift given that Japanese companies used to be the single largest source of foreign investment in China. Instead, Japanese companies appear to be shifting their focus to the U.S., with new investments by Japanese firms hitting a record $75 billion last year. Zooming out, the overall economic situation in China is still getting worse. According to the country's central bank, the People's Bank of China said in a report that weak domestic spending remains a problem. Plus, the real estate sector, one of the engines that used to fire up China's economy, is still in turmoil. And with corporate transactions drying up, a number of U.S. law firms have shrunk their China presence, closing down offices, among them Skadden, Perkins Coie, and Latham Watkins. In the tech sector, Apple also lost its status as the largest smartphone seller inside China, with its sales plunging 25% in the last quarter of 2024. Foreign automakers are also having a hard time. This January, Porsche said its sales inside China dropped by 28% last year. For BMW, it was a 13% drop. As for what's behind those numbers, Beijing expanded the definition of its espionage in 2023 without clearly defining it. Violating it carries the risk of heavy punishment, including possible life in prison. It raises concerns for foreign companies, with many now fearing that normal business activities could be considered criminal acts. From the economy to public health, we have updates on the evolving flu reports inside China. Several residents from different provinces told us that major hospitals are overloaded with patients and that numerous deaths are being reported by families. Local report says the rising deaths has spurred the construction of new crematoriums, while burials have once again become an option for several regions where it had been banned. All of this information is currently being censored by Chinese authorities and media agencies. Here are what some Chinese citizens have to say. To protect their safety, we won't publish their full names and have distorted their voices.
This epidemic is severe. So far, there is no official statement on it. Hospitals everywhere are full, with many patients waiting for hospital beds. Now, with so many people dying, the crematoriums are very busy. Here where I live, we have about 20 to 30 deaths a day, and we've even built a new large crematorium with over a dozen furnaces operating every day.
This Chinese resident is from eastern China's Anhui province. He says he works in the funeral industry. He suspects the rising deaths in China are not being caused by the influenza virus. The same speculation was raised in a number of separate interviews with people from different areas. According to the most recent official health data from Beijing, roughly over 2.8 million people were infected with the flu, and only 9 people died. That data marks a stark contrast than what residents are saying. Li is a resident from central China's Henan province.
In Henan, Anhui, and Jiangxi provinces, very quietly, traditional burials have been resumed, because burying someone reduces the pressure on crematoriums. In the past, restrictions on burials in favor of cremation used to be very strict in rural areas. Since the end of last year, especially in the north, many young people have died. In my social circle, including my relatives, clients, colleges, dozens of people died. There are even more deaths outside of my own circle.
A resident from Hebei province in northern China reported that hospitals are also crowded in his area.
In a small village of about 100 residents, several people have died around the time of the Lunar New Year. Just to give you an example, normally a coffin that costs 4,000 yuan is now being sold for 12,000. More people have died, so the price has gone up, and now it's difficult to even order one.
The illness outbreak is also reportedly impacting young people, with parents posting on social media mourning the loss of their children. According to a Chinese pediatrician, the influenza virus can cause high fevers in young children. If the fevers don't break, they can lead to severe brain damage in some cases. The doctor said for these cases, the death rate could range from 30 to 75%. Coming up, Chinese hackers that tracked millions of Americans still in action. A report says a notorious hacking group has been trying to compromise Cisco devices. A look at the targets. Concerns are rising as South Korea's data security officials accuse the Chinese AI model DeepSeek of sharing user data with ByteDance, TikTok's Chinese parent. And China is cozying up to a small Pacific island nation, having signed a strategic partnership deal with the Cook Islands. Meanwhile, some people in the Pacific country are speaking out against it. More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Alice Tang, in for Tiffany Meyer. A notorious Chinese hacking group is still in action. According to a new report, the investigation reveals hacking group Salt Typhoon is still infiltrating U.S. telecom networks. That's by trying to breach over 1,000 network devices belonging to tech giant Cisco. Salt Typhoon previously breached networks operated by AT&T and Verizon. They tracked the locations of millions of Americans. They also breached J.D. Vance's phone while he was still vice president-elect. As for what the group is up to lately, a report from cybersecurity firm Recorded Future said the Chinese hackers compromised devices of a US-based branch of UK telecom tech company. The report added the hackers may have also targeted multiple universities, including UCLA, Utah Tech University, and California State University, with the goal of accessing research. Chinese AI model DeepSeek is facing heavy scrutiny. That's over its potential for sharing data on its users with China. South Korean regulators told media on Tuesday they have confirmed DeepSeek is communicating with Chinese tech giant ByteDance, the same Chinese company that owns controversial social media platform TikTok. The regulators said they have yet to confirm what data was transferred and to what extent.
This comes after a U.S. data security firm raised concerns earlier this month about ByteDance code being used in DeepSeek. The analysis says those codes could allow the software to track user behavior, collect device metadata, and even allow remote control of the user's app. Last month, the app topped app stores in the US, UK, and many other countries. Meanwhile, concerns are growing over whether the Chinese Communist Party could exploit its data stored in China. Since then, many governments have banned the app from official devices. 2 weeks ago, U.S. lawmakers introduced a bill to ban DeepSeek on all government devices, calling the app a, quote, 5-alarm national security fire.
Turning to the Pacific, on Tuesday, a nation in the South Pacific unveiled a strategic partnership deal with China. The agreement between the Cook Islands and Beijing have sparked protests over what critics describe as a lack of transparency. Cook Islands Prime Minister Mark Brown signed a deal during a trip to Beijing this month, set to last for the next 5 years. The pact spans areas like deep-sea mining, infrastructure projects, and education scholarships. It doesn't mention any security ties, a contrast to what other deals China has made with countries in the region. Brown previously said he would sign more than one deal with Beijing, but this is the only document he's published so far. On Monday, hundreds of protesters lined up outside the island's parliament, holding signs that read, "Stay connected with New Zealand." Worth noting, the Cook Islands is a self-ruled country with constitutional links to New Zealand. Besides sharing a passport, New Zealand provides assistance on foreign affairs and defense to the island nation. And for the United States, the Pacific Island nations are of great strategic importance, especially in countering the Chinese Communist Party's ambition to expand its global influence. The son of Hong Kong pro-democracy activist Jimmy Lai says his father could die in jail if he doesn't get help. Lai has been held in solitary confinement since December 2020.
But his health has gotten quite a bit worse over the last 5 years. As you can imagine, having a 77-year-old in a little concrete box that goes up to 30, 40 degrees Celsius in the summer, by himself, that will do that to someone. But his spirit is still strong and mentally. From my understanding, I can't go back to Hong Kong because I advocate for him, but he's still doing well mentally. But his body is breaking down.
It also, I think, is a test case because how the world responds to what's happening to Jimmy Lai will send a very important message to China. And then in turn, if Jimmy Lai remains in prison, convicted, or even dies in prison, it sends a very worrying message to other authoritarian regimes around the world.
Sebastian Lai hopes the U.S. and U.K. can pressure Hong Kong to release his father. Jimmy Lai founded the now shuttered Apple Daily newspaper. He remains in solitary confinement while his trial continues. He holds British-Chinese dual citizenship. He has pleaded not guilty to 2 charges under the draconian Beijing-imposed national security law there. The law was introduced after the 2019 Hong Kong pro-democracy protests. The US and UK governments have condemned the trial as politically motivated. President Trump claimed in a podcast interview before taking office that he would 100% get Lai out of jail. Lai's international legal team says his case is part of a trend of using lawfare to silence journalists.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Alice Tang in for Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you soon.